My name is Chris Goodwin, Department of Archives and History. If you have not already, please silence your phones. And join us next Wednesday when we're back at the Winter Building for Janice Tracy, who will discuss her book, Mississippi Moonshine Politics, on the tangled history of Prohibition in the state. I just can't imagine. Today, however, we are delighted to have Hardin Kapp and Todd Sanders to discuss their book, The Architecture of William Nichols, Building the Antebellum South in North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi. We are here in the old Capitol, one of Nichols' buildings, the oldest building in downtown Jackson. Could not ask for a more appropriate place to have this talk. Hardin Kapp, a Jackson native, is director of the Historic Preservation Program and associate professor at the School of Architecture, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is co-editor of Synergistic, Reinventing the Post-Industrial City. From 2002 till 2008, he was the historical architect and campus historic preservation manager at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Todd Sanders is a name familiar to many of you who've heard his presentations on architects of Antebellum, Mississippi, the Mississippi work of architect A. Hayes Town, and Jackson's North State Street here at History's Lunch. Todd works with the department in the Historic Preservation Division and is author of Jackson's North State Street and Arcadia Publishing's Images of America series. Please help me welcome Kapp and Todd Sanders.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the great introduction. It's a pretty heady moment for me to be talking about William Nichols in this building, in this space, and hopefully I'll be able to share that feeling in a more sincere way throughout this talk. What Todd, my dear colleague Todd, and I have conjured up here is more of a tag team approach to talking here, where I will talk about Nichols up to his time in Mississippi, where Todd will talk about his Mississippi work, and then we'll come back together and give our concluding ideas and thoughts about his work. So what I would like to do to start this off, let me get this right here. Good, it works. So I would like to share with you, read to y'all the first few sentences of my introduction to my book, to give you an idea of where I'm coming from about Nichols. Throughout most of my life, I've been influenced by William Nichols, even though I never knew of him. He was one of the many architects who designed the backdrop of my boyhood in the American South. In the southern states of North Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi, Nichols designed state capitals, governor's mansions, and the campuses of each of these states' most important universities. So, I grew up here in Jackson, graduated from St. Andrews Episcopal School, and every Sunday I would come by and admire this building and the building here on the slide, or Governor's Mansion. I was on my way every Sunday morning to the church where my family worshipped, Yahweh United Methodist, which also has a Nichols relation, tangentially, and that Todd will talk about. And although I never thought about who was the architect of this building, and the one we're in, and the building that I walked by every Sunday, and even after I graduated from high school, I never thought about who designed it. So I went off to architecture school, went off and became an architect, designed stuff, restored stuff. And then I had an opportunity to interview to be the historic architect at the University of North Carolina. And it was a 2-day experience. Interviewed by faculty and students, I was interviewed by donors, and then my final interview was with the chancellor of the university itself, James Neeson, who said after a brief meeting in his office, let's go take a walk. Let's go walk around and let me show you some things on campus. So we walked around the historic quads at Chapel Hill, and we ended up, see if I can point right, in this building, Girard Hall, which was a pretty unassuming building, kind of forgotten, kind of mossy. And we walked in it, And the chancellor turned to me and said, "Mr. Kapp, did you know that this building had a portico on it?" And I said, "No, I was aware of that." And he said, "Yes, it did. It did. It was torn down. And wouldn't it be a wonderful idea to reconstruct it?" So I could have, at that moment, discussed the ethics of historic preservation. And I could have even quoted the Secretary of Interior standards or the Venice Charter. But I really wanted the job. So I turned to him and I said, "Chancellor, that's a beautiful idea. Let's do it together." So I went on and then I had to figure out, what was this that I was looking at? How was I going to restore it? Who was this architect? And lo and behold, it brought me back here, back to Jackson. Lo and behold, this little humble building right here was designed by the same architect who designed all this. And there I started looking even more. And so I looked at precedents that scholars believed that he had done, had used to build this portico. Found out that he had based it on a plate from the two British architects named Stuart and Babette on the Temple of Eleusis, which is right here in the corner. I had an archaeological team come and look at how the foundations worked to find out where it was on the building, which was here in the middle. And then through all that, finding fragments that literally were lawn ornaments in people's yards at Capitol Hill, I figured out how the portico was put together. And here you can see how it evolved up to what it looks like today on the Capitol Hill campus. There's the old well right next to it. So through all that, I found out that William Nichols was born in Bath, England, came to North Carolina, did design the state capitol, designed the University of North Carolina, then went to Alabama, then went to New Orleans, then came here, and died in 1853, and was buried in the Oddfellow Student Cemetery in Lexington, Mississippi, just up the road from here. And from just that, I said to myself, now that is a story. I have to figure this one out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just kind of give you an idea of why the building we're in looks the way it does. What was the ideals that he was aspiring to? And so we have to go first. Well, first off, I want to give you an idea of where he went and how he got here. So Nichols landed, we believe, around Norfolk, Virginia, at the age of 20 years old. And he migrated down to Newman, North Carolina. From there, he did some work for about 6 years, and then moved up to Edenton, North Carolina. And I'll show you some work that he did there. It's really magnificent. Then he moved to Fayetteville, which was then the building city, the big booming city in North Carolina. And from there, he worked in Raleigh, Chapel Hill, Hillsborough. And then for reasons that I don't think I have time to really delve into, both maybe shady and both practical, he inexplicably, after 27 years of successful practice in North Carolina, moves to Tuscaloosa, where he literally builds that city. He builds the Alabama State Capitol, which is very reminiscent of this building. He builds the University of Alabama, which just last month celebrated its 150th anniversary of it being burned by the Union Army. And then he also designed numerous houses and churches there. From there, he has what we call, Todd and I call his midlife crisis. He goes, because he couldn't get any more work in Alabama, he moves to New Orleans. He was actually turned down to design this building the first time, and moves to New Orleans, and works only 2 years there, but he completely transforms his ideas of architecture, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then he moves to Jackson, where he builds this building, the Mississippi Governor's Mansion, and the State Penitentiary, among other buildings. And then finally, after a lot of other buildings, he moves to Oxford, designs the University of Mississippi, and then he moves to Yazoo City, and then moves to Lexington, where he's buried today. So this kind of gives you an idea of the legacy of the buildings that you're in, He starts off with this building that he designs in Raleigh, North Carolina State House. Incorporates, learns from that, comes and designs the Alabama Capitol in Tuscaloosa, which then he learns from that, builds the building that we're in today. So, let me go back to where he starts. In 1780, he was born in Bath, England. And here he was, I think, always inspired by what he experienced in Bath, walking around the circus and the crescent in Bath. And I think the details that you can see on this building, the reason why it was stucco in the first place, and now let's see, re-stucco, explains this love of the Bath stone that he grew up with. Now his father, Samuel Nichols, was by the records in Somerset, was both a surveyor, which is like a building measurer, and a cabinet maker. And I believe that this is how Nichols learned the trades that he did. He starts out, when he comes to North Carolina, as a pretty humble kid. He was only 20 years old. And he starts to take on smaller jobs as a builder, as a carpenter mainly, but then always incorporating ideas from his mother country, England. So here you can see a portico that he designed for a very federal style house. This is pretty much one of the first documented works of William Nichols. So this is what he culminates is in here. He starts off kind of humble with this portico. And so he then moves on. He does a small law office, also in Newbern, not far from the Newbern Academy here, which is based, especially this motif here, on a book that he had under his arm called The Practical Carpenter's Helper from William Payne. So, moving right along, he then moves up to Edenton, North Carolina, which is a beautiful town, and redoes the interior of this Episcopal church, adding pews, columns, and structure. And here we start to see one thing that plagued his clients for his entire career, including this building, and especially the governor's mansion. He blew budgets. He really could spend money. And so the church cried bitterly about, can't you just tone it back? And these quotes, that would be discreditable to my talent. So you had to, if you bought a Nichols building, you really bought a Nichols building. So one of the buildings, and this is where I think Todd and I disagree, his favorite building of Nichols is the governor's mansion. Granted, I think it's a beautiful building, but this is mine. This is Hayes Plantation, not far from Edenton, right across the creek from Edenton. An absolutely wonderful, beautiful plantation house overlooking the Alabama South. And here, it was built in 1818. Here you start to see things that become iconic in antebellum architecture in the South. The columns, kind of a belvedere, cooling, all these ideas that have maybe grandeur iconographic connections, but are very practical. These are elements that keep you cool in the summer, and it does get hot in Chowan County, North Carolina. And then, of course, in that building is perhaps what I think one of the most beautiful rooms in the South, the Gothic Library Days, which is out of walnut, and has this incredible, aquamarine ceiling, and then when you look out, all you see is the Alabama Sound. It's absolutely splendid. And so he comes to, this is how I come into the play once again. He comes into Chapel Hill at a time when the university was expanding and really defines that campus as we know it. He closed what was just kind of an open alleyway and made it into a quadrangle. And dealing with a bell problem, there was a bell in the cupola of the South building at the University of North Carolina, which was rotting off the building. He removes it and puts it down in the center of that space. And you can see here this paper cut here, which was then known as the Belfry. It's now, if you know the Carolina campus, that's where the old well is. And it didn't survive. It's the only images we have because drunk Carolina students burned it during a prank in 1856. But here you can see kind of the beginnings of what we call UNC. Here is one of my favorite projects I like to talk about. This is his first state capitol, and that was how where he took the remodeling of a federal-style state house, which is pretty inconspicuous, and transforms it into a capitol like what we see here today. And this is really one of the first examples of expanding an idea that was first started with William Thornton and later perpetuated by Benjamin Henry Trove and Charles Bulfinch. And that is the idea of a capitol and how it should look. Like this building, where we have cruciform form, we have a house chamber here on the north side, we have the Senate on the south side, and they're united by a rotunda with a dome, punctuated on the outside with a portico. These are elements that we as citizens identify what state governments are, and I think Nichols was one of the first to perpetuate that idea, especially in the South. So other buildings he did in North Carolina, he did a ballroom that survived from a great house in Fayetteville. It's actually a very tiny room. My colleague of mine said they must have had small dances. It's an amazing, perfectly cubic Masonic lodge in Hillsborough, North Carolina. And then another very popular house built in Raleigh, the Mordecai House. This was built in 1819, 1825, 1826. So here you can see this is the capital of North Carolina, of the University of North Carolina. Various other buildings was already an impressive career for Nichols. But in 1827, he responds to an advertisement in the Huntsville Register and moves to Tuscaloosa, where he designs his second state capital, the Alabama state capital in Tuscaloosa, which unfortunately does not exist anymore. It was burned in the 1920s. But here you can start to see, once again, the capital you're in. Very similar forms, a little bit more refined. You see this north end portico. Here we have it recessed into the building, but there is a standing crowd. Their house chamber, not too dissimilar to what we're in right now, and the rotunda, which Todd will talk about this motif right here. And here it is today at the Capitol Park in Tuscaloosa, where this image is interesting that I wanted to point out, was the treatment of the Doric columns, where they have a plain face at the bottom third of the shaft, and then they're fluted up here. When you come out today and look at the capitals on the north and south entrance, you'll see something very similar. So you can start to see that Nichols was not someone that invented something new every day, which I find annoying about architects, but he was someone that evolved ideas, and they were very slow and steady. And so here's another example of his churches. This is Christ Episcopal Church, and we'll see some examples of churches he did in a minute from Todd here in Jackson. And then this is the University of Alabama, which I think is one of the most unfortunate mishaps in the Civil War. It was burned 150 years ago, last April 3rd. But it was interesting. It was developed, and this is a plan of it, where you can see the campus was laid out in the letter pi, Greek letter pi, mainly because of the way the topography works down to the Black Warrior River. And here you can see how it looks today in the modern campus of the University of Alabama. And then this is all that's left of the rotunda of the University of Alabama. But it is interesting because here was this was a campus that was really built on Jeffersonian ideas. The Board of Trustees and founders of the university, as well as the governor of Alabama, were very much Jeffersonians, very proud Jeffersonians. And when they gave the job to Nichols, they gave him this map from James Maverick. Maverick played here, Peter Maverick, and said, do something like this. But Nichols was much more pragmatic, whereas Jefferson had more of a romantic idea, in my opinion, of how the pavilions and how pedagogy would work. Nichols understood that you had to have big buildings to put students in, laboratories in, classrooms in, etc. And so here's one of the earliest surviving etchings of what the University of Alabama looked, with a rotunda flanked by buildings that were like dormitories and labs. Here's an example of a building that had labs in it. This was the Lyceum at the University of Alabama. And then these are conjectural drawings that I did. I worked with an artist who's doing a big painting at the university right now. And I'll go through them pretty quickly. So here you can start to see those ideas that soaked into his mind back when he was at Bath. You know, the rustication around the entries, the planar quality of the buildings, the rusticated bases, all out of the native stone from the Black Warrior River. And so this artist that I was working with had models reconstructed of the campus. And so here you can see maybe the earliest ideas that some of you that went to Ole Miss of the Lyceum, their Lyceum that didn't survive. And then this is a model of their idea of the Rotunda, which was described as one of the most beautiful spaces in the South, but it had the worst acoustics you could ever imagine. Kids would drop books, and it was thunder, whispering could be heard across the room. It had problems, but it was still a beautiful space. And so here I'm comparing how the University of Alabama laid out to the University of Virginia. You can see a lot of similarities in how it worked here. So you can see how the Rotunda was that ideal, the Jefferson ideal of a temple of knowledge, you know, bookended with another classical building. But where I think Nichols does it, I think more practical, maybe better, was how he defines the space with buildings with a little more heft. And so this is the only building that survives on the Alabama campus today. It's Stewart's Hall at the now called Gordon's House here in Alabama. And there's other buildings that he designed in Alabama. Was this one here, the James Deering House. And so here you can start to begin to see ideas that he brought with him to Mississippi, mainly even at the governor's stage. And then other houses he designed. This one's up in Lauderdale, North Alabama, Forks of Cypress, and this one here, Thornhill. You know, so we start to see here in 1832, ideas of colossal porticos placed on residential buildings. Nichols didn't invent that idea, but he did perpetuate it quite a bit. And here I'd love to show this image. This is Rosemont, not far from Thornhill in Greene County. Here you can see that portico, similar to what we saw in Hayes, built nearly 18 years earlier, and then that Belvedere that kind of gave people some air conditioning, primitive air conditioning. And so, I was mentioning earlier, he went to New Orleans. And here you start to see his ideas change. And so I had, the image right here doesn't do it justice in this light, but I had someone ask me in Tuscaloosa last month, how can you tell a Nichols building? You know, what's the telltale signs? And I said, well, if you got one of these over your door, chances are it was a Nichols building. And so he had a lot of motifs that he brings with him from England up till 1834. And then he goes to New Orleans. He becomes surrounded by new ideas, mainly the ideas of men of the fever that were brought in by James Dakin and Charles Schollier and his brother, James Schollier. James? And it kind of is an epiphany. So here, best compares the two. This is what Nichols' detailing was in 1825. This is a monument he designed for Archibald Henderson in Salisbury County, North Carolina. You see this kind of very volumetric, Johnstone-based English ornament that he was working with. He comes out of New Orleans and comes and builds this building, and you start to see this very linear ornamentation, which is what Men of the Fever was perpetuating. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Todd. So.
All right. Well, you it's up to Jackson. It's interesting, I've often thought about how funny it is, at least I guess from this perspective, that Mr. Nichols was passed over the first time to come be our state architect. Politics got in the way. The governor at the time hired a house carpenter from Nashville, basically, and Mr. Nichols, you know, one of the longest practicing architects as there were in the South at the time, being snubbed, and I'm sure his feelings were hurt, to say the least. And he goes to New Orleans and becomes an assistant state engineer down there and basically does what he's told, which I'm sure also upset him a little bit. But it was very fortunate for us that he did that, because in New Orleans, which was, I think, the second busiest port city in the country at the time, all this wonderful building, all these great revival buildings were being reconstructed, all these great architects that he got to see their work. And then Menard Lefevre, the New York architect, very prominent in New York, just published a pattern book. You know, you saw the slide earlier, the William Payne pattern book, which was an older English architecture they brought with him. Well, in New Orleans, he acquired Menard Lefevre's new book, which was published in 1835, which was off the presses, the latest, greatest architecture out of New York. So he gets that. So then when he finally is hired by the state of Mississippi in 1836 to design this building, he's refreshed. He's had an epiphany, if you will, at least I like to say that. He goes to New Orleans a good, competent, sort of old-fashioned English-influenced architect, and comes out of New Orleans a brand new, bold, American Greek revival architect. That may be too fine a point, but that's what I like to say about it. So he comes here with the greatest ideas, latest greatest ideas in architecture he's witnessed firsthand in New Orleans, as well as this pattern book that shows you how to design everything from staircases and mantelpieces and windows to even suggestions for entire buildings. All of that percolates its way through Nichols' designs that we see that he does in Mississippi. Of course, we have here our old state capitol, this new state house that he was designed to build. Of course, he got here and had a lot of trouble. He had to tear down the work that the house carpenter had started and start over again. And we did find, during the restoration in 2009, the bad bricks that he had to shove off in the hole. So it's not that some of those stories actually are true. And he had problems. Poor Mr. Nichols, I feel sorry for him, in a way. I don't know what I'm doing, what am I doing? He comes here to Jackson, and you all know, Jackson was 15 years old. Every time the legislature met, they tried to move the state capital. Nobody wanted to be here. So he had all that problem with a little bitty town. Before the railroads got here, it was hard to get men, hard to get materials, hard to get what you needed here. They had all politics, but he fought through all of that and built this wonderful building. And I was reminded, when you go to London, to St. Paul's, you see Christopher Wren's tomb. If you seek his monument, look around you. Well, you can do the same for Mr. Nichols here in this building and also the governor's mansion. But you can see here what he did. I love the slide Paul had earlier that shows the first attempt at the state capitol that he comes up with when he remodels the old North Carolina capitol. And he has to work within an existing building. He does a good job. Unfortunately, that building burned when he was working on this one. Then he goes to Alabama, and still in that very English sort of federal style, he develops the idea for a state capitol there as well, which includes the rotunda and the House chamber and the Senate chamber on opposite ends. And he brings that idea with him here. And, you know, it's an interesting thing. When Paul first said, you know, Nichols sort of ran with the idea and was one of the first to do it, I thought, well, as a historian, you're taught to be very careful of any broad, big ideas at first. And I started looking, and he was one of the first, at least in the South, to really take the idea and develop it at least 3 times. So it's remarkable. You'll also notice that Paul mentions the stucco that's been put back on the building. I think everybody's heard enough about this by now, but this building was supposed to be stucco from the very beginning, and it is once again. The idea is, certainly in the case of Greek revival buildings, which this building is Greek revival, means reviving the architecture of ancient Greece. Well, the buildings we were reviving were stone temples, and to really look right, they got to look like stone. The basement story here has always been stone, originally stone quarry in Hines County. They didn't hold up so well. But the second, or up first, and the second floor, the main floors have always been stucco. And that's as they are here today, to look like stone. And then the stucco itself scored to look like blocks of quarried stone. Interestingly enough, the back elevation is very brick. It always was. We don't know what Mr. Nichols' original intent was, but it never got stucco. And of course, this is the governor's mansion, which he finishes this building more or less in 1840, and any big public building is never really finished. And we know that. We continued coming back to try to fix it. But he begins the Governor's Mansion in 1840, which he writes very beautifully to be an elegant building, respectful of the Republican simplicity and dignity of the state. And as Paul said, he ends up spending an awful lot of money. And in his mind, what I guess was a simple Republican meaning of the Republic, building ends up being what at the time was probably one of the largest houses in the state. 2 stories over a full basement, all brick, beautiful Greek revival detailing, again taking the pattern books, and it's an inspiration story of Rebecca went all the way back there. This wonderful half-round portico with the Corinthian columns, which of course the Corinthian order is the most elaborate and most expensive, so he uses it here on the Governor's Mansion, now on it here on the state capitol. You can see more details. The recessed portico, the northern and southern ends that on the Alabama Capitol were outside the volume of the building. They've been pulled within the building here. We have our Ionic portico, very similar to what was done at the Alabama Capitol, but at the Alabama Capitol it was an engaged portico. Here it's been pulled out to be a full freestanding portico, much more Grecian. And then you see the back with the courtroom here in the apse. It's interesting too. Originally as designed, this building had a trade gate straight across basement entrance. There were no arches on the basement level. In 1870, the building underwent a much needed rehabilitation, and the arches were added as part of the Italianate style. And then in the 1959-61 restoration, the stucco was removed. So by the time we got this building in 1961 as a State History Museum, it looked an awful lot like the Alabama Capitol, even though it was much more modern. You can see the floor plan. Again, the original corridor spaces, which are largely as they always were. And the building was abandoned by the state government in 1903. Thankfully not torn down, thankfully not burned. It survived and was turned into state offices in 1916. We did lose the original chambers on both ends, but we saved the building. Fortunately, we were able to recreate those based on evidence, photographs, and the Alabama Capitol. Here's the floor plan. This is something that I really love. Bear in mind, Mr. Nichols is an Englishman. He's from England, he immigrates here, and like often happens, immigrants really become almost better citizens than some of us that are born here. And he takes these ideas and puts them in his architecture. And I noticed this in 2009 when we had the legislature open the session here, and I stood right outside those doors. You'll notice the glazing, the glass in the doors, wasn't put back in the 59-61 restoration, but we did in the most recent restoration. And it's fascinating. Standing out there, I watched the Speaker of the House. He looks through the doors, across the rotunda, and right at the Lieutenant Governor. These two houses watch each other. It's beautiful. You can see here the Senate chamber with a wonderful little ring in there where all the senators could, I guess, pretend that they were ancient Roman senators and walk around and speak, as they often did. And then, of course, our House chamber, which in its current configuration, the way we restored it to look like this configuration dates from 1870 as well. Originally, there would have been Ionic columns out in front of these pilasters, more like Mr. Nichols' Alabama chamber, we think. And then, of course, the Governor's Mansion, which again, as Paul alluded to, is actually my favorite of Nichols' buildings. I just think it's wonderful. It is, as you all know, the second oldest continuously occupied, purpose-built Governor's Mansion in the United States. Wow, how about that? It is extremely important. That is very significant. It's very unusual. Virginia's is a few years older, and Texas is next, but it's amazing that we still have it. And it is a remarkable house. And you can really see when you go to the Governor's Mansion, all the details as you can throughout this building, all of the woodwork on the trim, all the inspiration from Bernard Lefevre, that New York architect. This building was finished largely in 1842. Bernard Lefevre's book was published in 1835. So within a decade, this tiny little backwoods frontier town has architecture directly inspired by that of New York and by way of New Orleans through Mr. Nichols. This was remarkable. He was the first architect to incorporate Bernard Lefevre's detailing in the state of Mississippi that I'm aware of. And in fact, it wasn't until 1857 that some of Bernard Lefevre's detailing shows up in matches at Stanton Hall. So I think that says a lot. These beautiful interior detailing with Corinthian columns from the octagonal entry vestibule into the stair hall back there. These are photographs from before the 1970s restoration. We put back the original stair design. And then again, this beautiful detailing. Bernard Lefevre, all these Grecian details in the ends, all taken from ancient Greek examples. And then he departs from his normal, classically inspired architecture to do the state penitentiary. which, as you all know, stood where the new Capitol does. Joke right there, anyway. It's interesting that it is very castellated Gothic. Now, the building was heavily damaged during the Civil War because it was used for military purposes, but it was rebuilt, as we have been told and certainly indicated, largely along Mr. Nichols' original designs. But you may wonder, why in the world would you go to such a different design for a penitentiary when it's such beautiful classical buildings? Well, in this time period, it was very common for buildings to sort of take on symbolism. And castles, fortresses, imprisonment all kind of work very well in this. You have a very heavy stone brick building. It looks like a place you don't want to get stuck inside, and that was the idea. And also, a few years earlier in Pennsylvania, the Eastern State Penitentiary, designed by
John Knott.
Thank you. He had sort of set the precedent in this country for designing big prisons in Gothic Revival style. Mr. Nichols was following along with that. Well, another thing that's fascinating about Mr. Nichols, and is true probably of all architects, if they're going to survive as architects, particularly back in this day and age, they had to make good friends. They had to be careful who their friends were, and they had to play politics. And Mr. Nichols was very good at that, and he gets a lot of commissions through his political connections with his friends, which again, nothing new under the sun. But this is a building, a house rather, called the Poindexter House that stood out in West Jackson, where Poindexter Park is. Governor Poindexter built this house in the 1840s. And the original part, not the wings that were added later to the apartments. It was a very simple front, ionic building. And again, going back all the way to Gerard Hall and his love of the ionic column that Mr. Nichols used throughout his career. Paul, I mentioned earlier, how do you know if it's a Nichols building? Well, when we have a smoking gun, it's nice, but very often we don't. Nichols is one of the hardest to document architects I've ever run across. There's very little out there about him, apart from public records about these buildings, and knowing kind of where he was, and where he died, and where he's buried, or some things that he did that we know, and occasionally show up in newspaper articles. So we did a lot of this, okay, we know he was in this town this year. Let's look, let's see what else is there. We know what he did in North Carolina, we know what he did in Alabama. Let's make some attributions. And we did. We made some attributions based on architectural style and detail, date of construction, and most importantly, I think, for Nichols, the connections. Did he know these people? And if all those things came together, we felt very comfortable making attributions. One of the things I did with Paul with this book was to expand the section on his Mississippi work. It was very slim. We knew of very few things that he did. So as part of this process, we really looked. And of course, Nichols was here 1836, 1853. He happened to be here during a downtime economically. So he didn't get to build maybe as many big grand houses and other things as he would have had he lived in the late 1850s. But anyway, another interesting part. We also know Mr. Nichols' love of working with academic institutions, state universities, and schools. This is, or was rather, Johnson Hall, which was the Brandon Male and Female Academy, which the date is given as 1837, which is probably a little too early for actual construction, probably more like early 1840s, but at any rate, Mr. Nichols was here. And we know Brandon is close today, it's part of the greater metropolitan area, but it was close back then too. It was just across the river and over that way. And Brandon was a pretty substantial town. It had enough going on that they could build a grand building. We also know from the newspaper article that he was involved with the design more as a consultant of the courthouse, not the one that you may know about, the one before that. So we know he was involved in Brandon. And this building, beautiful ionic portico, similar in effect to the Lyceum building at the University of Alabama and the one at Ole Miss. Churches, he's always been associated with this wonderful Methodist church, the tangential connection Paul mentioned earlier, which was the first of the three Methodist churches to stand where Galloway does today. The original Methodist church faced south into Smith Park, much like the 1843 Baptist church that still stands did. And this building, although small and a little simpler, is very similar to the Christ Episcopal Church in Tuscaloosa. And again, Mr. Nichols worked with the people that were there, went to church there, making these decisions, all these wonderful connections. This is Sedgwood up in Madison County, and this was sort of a new attribution. 1842, approximated construction. Mr. Nichols was still around in the area. This house has always kind of puzzled me. It's very, very fine. very well detailed, very well built, very early plantation house. And as an architectural historian, we'll throw out early dates, I'm suspect, but this is so well documented about who built it, when, the dates. And then the man, the circles, the man that built it, Mr. Thomas, he knew lots of the other people that Mr. Nichols knew. And I thought, we're going to look at it. And so we attributed this to Nichols. And I'm very comfortable with that attribution. It's unlike anything built before since in Madison County. I hate to use the word unique, but it's unique. And it just makes sense that it's a Nichols design. Then we go to something we know he did, the University of Mississippi. And I will say, I went to Mississippi State, so whatever that means. I did go with this, but I knew that Nichols designed the university campus. I've always thought it was a beautiful campus and beautiful buildings. Prior to our work on this book, it was always sort of like, the only other publication about Nichols' work, they just didn't pay much attention to it. And I thought, first of all, it's deserving of more than that, just for what it is architecturally, historically. But I think the design is better. And maybe it's not, it certainly wasn't the same design at all like the University of Alabama, or even like what he did in North Carolina, but it builds on those ideas, and it's a very clever solution. Now this is an early map that shows the circle at Ole Miss, with the Lyceum here, and with the dormitory buildings and all flanking around there. Little Stewart's Hall out back, similar to the Corbis House. And then of course this is the road going to Oxford. Now if you know about the topography, this is the high ground. It drops off precipitously pretty much in every direction. So he picks the best place to put it, and it's around an octagon. And the road is an open-ended octagon. So when you come to the university from Oxford, down this road, you see the Lyceum, beautiful placing. You see the grand two-story Ionic portico of the Lyceum building. It's a wonderful square quad, but it's actually an octagon surrounded by the buildings he designed. And of course, there is an early photograph. And this is actually, this building was too small almost when they opened in 1848 because they made a pretty good size addition in the back right before this 1860 photograph. And then one of the dormitory buildings that surrounded the quad. So it is still there. It's very interesting though how he goes from making quads in North Carolina to having the rotunda in the middle to having an open middle. Now the design here was not his original. There's a record from the commission who was designing the buildings, and he wanted to, what sounds like, design the building very similar to what you have here in the old Capitol, actually, the way it's described, with flanking wings and all. And one of the board members, Mr. Ventris from Whipple, said, no, you're going to have to tone that down a little bit. So he came up with this 3-story building without a rusticated basement like you have here, but instead, he sort of gets that rustication with these stop-fluted columns. You see on the smaller skeletons, porticos. The first third are unfluted, and then the upper 2 thirds are fluted. So it gives the impression of a rusticated basement, obviously a little more budget conscious. So that's what we get, a beautiful building. And of course, we all know how important that building is to the university. But what happened to Mr. Nichols' original design? Here's another attribution he made. This is Chickasaw Female College of Pontotoc, begun early 1850s, 53, something like that perhaps. We've looked, there are no records to speak of that show who the architect was or who the builder was. But this is the building as it stood. Now, where's Nichols? He dies in 1853, buried in Lexington. We know he was in Oxford. There's a local builder in Oxford. They worked very closely, worked with other people at the University of Mississippi. So there's that connection. Mr. Nichols is known to share designs, and people would borrow his designs. And back in the 19th century, it was not uncommon for people to take other architects' work and use it as their own. So whatever actually happened, this is what got built at Chickasaw College. And apart from the fact that it has a square column Doric portico rather than an Ionic portico, it looks an awful lot like this building. It meets the description of what the board records say the original plan for Lyceum was to be. And if you look at the floor plans, taken from the Sanborn maps, this is the central section of Chickasaw College. This is the floor plan as originally designed for the Lyceum, which also reflects the description of the floor plan for Johnson Hall and several other things. So Nichols' fingerprints are all over this. And then he goes on down. I got to wrap up. I'm sorry, I'm getting carried away. I never do that. He works on the Yazoo County Courthouse. We know that. He writes a beautiful description in the newspaper describing the building eloquently. And Paul, at my suggestion, drew this. which looks remarkably like the slightly later courthouse in Canton, which I think somebody saw Mr. Nichols' courthouse. And then we know Mr. Nichols finishes out some of his lattice work, later work in Vicksburg. This is Shamrock, or Portfield House, which unfortunately was torn down in the late 1930s. But the little fluting of campus leaves here is described as being on the courthouse in Kansas City as well. The roof structure is very similar to the roof structure here, which you picked up in New Orleans, so you've got all these connections. And then the last building he worked on was the Lexington Female Academy, 1853, in Lexington. And it, of course, was torn down in the late 19th century. And this leaves a lot of the stories about key attributions, but at this point, we won't worry about that. We'll buy the book and read about that. So anyway, and Mr. Nichols' tombstone, where he is today.
Thank you, Paul. So this is his tombstone in Lexington, where I found him in August 2005. He hadn't moved very far. But one of the things I think is really interesting about how this was an Oddfellow cemetery, they put several things on his tombstone that I find interesting. One, where he was born. He was native of Bath, which I think is up here. And then also his occupation, architect. I found that to be something very interesting, that this was something that truly defined him. His obituaries that were published both in North Carolina and Alabama celebrated that this was an architect. So to wrap things up, I want to tell you about a year ago, I was in England and I gave a talk about William Nichols. And knowing my audience, who were very skeptical of all things American, I like to tease me that said that Independence Day wasn't just for us, that they enjoyed it as well. That how could I, convey the importance of Nichols? And one of the things that we as academics always have to deal with is this question: so what? Or its cousin or sister, who cares? and that's, way you have to define that. That's how you have to define the ideas that you publish. And for Todd and I, we tackled that question by talking about the preservation of his buildings as well as of him as an idea. And why is that important? And this differs between historians and us. For one thing, this building is still here. This building is still teaching us or telling us things. And this building is talking about who we are, what we are now, and where we will go. So when you think about the so what, you have to think about events that happened after Nichols. The desegregation of the University of Alabama happened at the front door of the Gorgas house. It should have probably happened in a lot of different places, but it happened there because of the importance of the moment. And the same thing with James Meredith at the Lyceum. So, these are some of the ideas that you have to think about. That this building that we're in right now will also inspire future generations, like it inspired me when I was a senior in high school, and on this very spot, practically, I heard Eudora Welty read Delta Wedding. I was sitting over there. And so, these are things that make historic buildings come alive. And so, they are the elements, they're the icons of how we identify places like Ole Miss, the University of North Carolina, and even Alabama. And they also embody what we think of, and what I thought of as I was growing up, what Mississippi is. So I want to thank y'all for coming. This is a really big treat. And I think we've got a little time for some questions. Thank you.